East Anglia and the eastern counties were on the front line for much of the Second World War. It was a period that would bring both triumph and tragedy, and change the region forever. Film was rare and expensive during the war, and there were severe restrictions on what could be filmed. Despite this, much of the footage you are about to see was shot by amateur cameramen in the region, and gives a unique picture of life in East Anglia and beyond during one of history's most terrible conflicts. Preparations for war were in full swing long before the conflict actually broke out. In Haverhill, Suffolk, bemused residents watch as tanks and troops take over the town to practice manoeuvres. In Suffolk cinemas, young men are urged to enlist in the ranks of the Territorial Army.
His Majesty's Secretary of State has sounded a clear call for home defence duty. There are healthy indications that its trumpet notes will not go unheeded. The good citizen is the patriotic citizen. His motto must be, my country, right or wrong, my country.
Norwich, 1938. British troops parade in the city and put on a display to the public. After years of defence cuts, the government is urgently rearming to meet the possible threat of Nazi Germany. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in Northampton. He was working hard to avoid a conflict, but preparations for war were already in hand. In Norwich, trenches were dug in Chapelfield Gardens as rudimentary air raid shelters. Public buildings were reinforced with sandbags to protect them against bomb blasts. Soldiers on leave were recalled to their regiments and are seen saying their last farewells. The British public knew that much depended on Chamberlain's meeting with Hitler in Munich. The government was certain that poison gas would be dropped from the air within hours of war breaking out. 38 million gas masks were distributed to households. They were hot, sweaty, and uncomfortable. In Luton, an ARP warden shows a householder how to put on her gas mask. In cinemas, audiences were reminded to carry their gas masks at all times. Schools regularly practiced for a gas attack. Here, young ladies from a Barnardo's home line up for a rehearsal. The official instructions for gas masks stated, remember, chin in, right in, first, before you start to pull the straps over your head. Children were issued with brightly coloured Mickey Mouse gas masks. To their delight, they discovered that the masks could be used to make rude noises. This was a war that would include everybody, and in 1938 a booklet was sent to households asking people to volunteer for national service. Fit men were needed for decontamination units, reserve troops, and the ambulance service. Women and children were required to work in communication centres and relay messages. This film reconstruction shows a Luton man responding to the appeal by joining the ARP, or air raid precautions. In the event of enemy bombing, it was their job to guide the public to safety. Thousands volunteered, but recruitment was patchy, and by the end of the year, Cambridge, Norwich and Ipswich all reported a shortage of key personnel.
I'm glad to have this opportunity of speaking to you on the subject of air raid precautions, so far as it affects our own ancient city. From time immemorial, our ancestors have sought to protect themselves from the possibility of attack from hostile elements, and some of our historic buildings are evidence of their spirit of heroic self-defense. Today, we are faced with greatly different conditions to those which occupied their attention. We are concerned with the organization of passive defense against the horrors of aerial bombardment. The heart-rending experiences of the civil population in Spain and China give us some idea of what we may expect in the event of wars breaking suddenly over us. The City Council have under consideration schemes for the protection of the public moving about the city. Careful thought has been given to the possibility of providing trenches, blast-proof shelters, or reinforced basements in vital and highly congested areas. But all this can be of little use without the willing cooperation and voluntary effort of the citizens generally in support of the complete scheme. Many hundreds of volunteers, men and women, are still required for duties as air raid wardens, auxiliary firemen, transport drivers, nursing, etc. It is vitally important for us as soon as possible to fill up the gaps that yet remain in the personnel of these services. Do not forget that by virtue of its geographical position, Norwich must be considered a danger area. The city authorities are determined to do their part as far as they can within the framework of the government regulations, but they can only do this with the wholehearted support of the general public. This film is not of sufficient length to have given it more than a fleeting glimpse of the various activities in which your services are solicited. But if it has created an impression on your mind or aroused a desire to be of service to your city, it will have achieved its purpose. Will you help?
The film we have just seen ended with a title card appealing for civilians to become involved. Those who felt patriotic or duty-bound volunteered immediately, and by the end of 1939, 1.5 million people were involved in some aspect of civil defence. Those who did sign up for civil duties ran through numerous exercises and drills, some of which were filmed to spread good working practice. This was especially true of hospitals. The government was certain that heavy bombing, which the Spanish had suffered, would lead to devastation and mass panic. Thus, local governments and civil defence personnel regularly practiced for the worst. Chapels, churches and schools were requisitioned for emergency hospitals. But most people had not signed up to civil defence or wartime duties, because it was not yet wartime. Most people still hoped that a war could be avoided. Spring, 1939. Refugees from Europe arrive at Thorpe Station, Norwich. Many of them were Jewish and were allowed to leave with the bare minimum of belongings. In 1940, most refugees were interred in British camps, suspected of being Nazi fifth column agents. By the end of 1940, the British government realised that refugees did not pose a security risk, and they were released from the camps. This is Mrs. Katbeck at Dovercourt, a refugee from Czechoslovakia. She fled the country with her mother, husband and daughter when the Germans invaded. On their journey across Europe, her mother disappeared. This film was taken by her husband, a professional photographer who served with the Free Czech Army stationed in Harwich. Meanwhile, Britons prepared for the worst. In July 1939, Sheringham stages a mock air raid to test its civil defence. Fireworks are let off to simulate bombs. Mock casualties lie on the pavement with labels showing the wounds they have sustained. Large-scale civil defence exercises are also held in Norwich that week. Responding to the wail of air raid sirens, wardens leave their homes. Discovering a fire, they alert the auxiliary fire service, who rush to the scene in their fire engine, a converted saloon car and trailer. Civil defence was still woefully under-equipped, and the attitude of the time was to make do with whatever was available. Friday, the 1st of September, 1939. The evacuation of women and children from London begins. The railways had not prepared extra timetables, and the process became chaotic, with groups being shoved into the first available spaces. The number of official evacuees was about 1 million, and the exodus of children from the cities and towns to the countryside was an epic, emotional undertaking. Endless groups of children clutching gas masks and cases were packed into trains, not knowing where they were going or if they would ever see their families again. To some, it was a welcome adventure, and for many, their first real experience of the countryside. Evacuees at Welwyn Garden City, Hertfordshire. Between midsummer and the end of September, over 1.5 million women and children were evacuated. Gradually, large numbers drifted back into the cities. Despite the upheavals, the evacuation of children had been remarkably efficient, as this film from Barnardo's was proud to display. Barnardo's was able to house children under its care thanks to the generosity of those who gave their homes and grounds over to them. Evacuees from the inner cities were not so welcome in the countryside. Children from the poorest areas often had no toilet training or sense of hygiene, and the levels of poverty exposed by the evacuation would prove instrumental in forming the post-war welfare state. Two Yarmouth toddlers polish the family car for the camera. The car will not be driven for many years. On Sunday, September the 3rd, Britain declared war on Germany. In her diary, Mrs. Bertha Smurden of Clacton wrote,
"Since Munich we have lived in war's heavy shadow, and it is a relief to be at something after the awful suspense and anxiety of past months. The children take matters very calmly."
After the broadcast, sirens sound throughout the region. It was a false alarm, triggered by the sighting of a French aeroplane near the coast. Families across the region rushed to their air raid shelters. A number of families had Anderson shelters. They were damp and drafty, but they saved innumerable lives. The government was certain that the Nazis would drop gas bombs on Britain, and exercises were carried out to combat the problem. Here, decontamination units practice on a railway line.
Danger gas notice boards are placed at appropriate points, and the decontamination squad proceeds to apply bleach powder to the contaminated sleepers and to the ballast near the crater. Bleach paste is applied to fish bolts, fish plates, and point rodding. It is very desirable to reduce as much as possible the risk of contamination from materials which must be handled.
The second greatest threat to civilians was from incendiary bombs. Part-time volunteers of the Norwich Auxiliary Fire Service undergo training by the River Wensum. The City Council donated slum buildings to be used for practice. When German bombers began to target built-up areas like Ipswich, Norwich and Colchester, it was the men of the Auxiliary Fire Service who tackled the flames. Their uniforms consisted of a single-breasted jacket, tin helmet, Wellington boots and a waterproof. They used water from any available source, including tanks and ponds, and they were either soaked through or singed by the flames. They rotated their duties in order to provide a round-the-clock service. In the weeks following the declaration of war, German bombers failed to appear. Some evacuees enjoyed their new homes and foster parents, but not all were so fortunate as those shown here.
When Mother said it's time for bed, up the stairs we climb.
On the home front, life settled down into what the Americans called the phony war. For ordinary people, there was nothing but tedious regulations. Identity cards were issued, and in October, ration books were sent to every household. Hitler had not expected Britain to go to war over Poland, and after the declaration, there was a long period of uneasy boredom. At Thorpe, near Norwich, George Swain, a local photographer, takes film of a relative home on embarkation leave, saying goodbye to his wife and children. The greatest threat to life was caused by the blackout. Boards and curtains were put up at windows to eliminate all light. To help people see in the dark, white flashes were painted along the edges of pavements. Street lamps were extinguished, and cars were fitted with a blackout cover. As winter approached and the nights pulled in, road accidents soared, and the number of fatalities doubled. The government began to release a deluge of public information films in an effort to make the roads safer.
The approaching dispatch rider is carrying an important message, the order for a convoy to move, or final instructions to a unit ready for action. Everything is scheduled to the minute. The dispatch must be delivered in time. But this dispatch will not be delivered in time. And what is the result? Not only tires, which are vital war material, but men's lives are endangered, and the success of an action. And all because of a piece of glass.
Military activity remained quiet. The RAF spent most of its time dropping propaganda leaflets over Germany. Christmas, 1939, at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Smurden in Clacton. The blackout is decorated with streamers, and Peter, their son, wears a cowboy hat. For people in Britain, the war, which was supposed to be over by Christmas, had not yet begun in earnest. The boredom of waiting was made worse by the winter of 1940, one of the coldest on record. Tractors skidded on ground frozen a foot deep. Roads were impassable, trains were delayed, and coal was in short supply. The severe weather lasted through January, February, and into March. Children were the only ones to relish it.
This is the BBC Home Service. The German army invaded Holland and Belgium early this morning by land and by landings from parachutes.
In May 1940, the Germans launched a surprise invasion of Denmark and Norway. Suddenly, the war was real. With the fall of France, Britain was next in line for invasion. East Coast beaches were mined and wired off. Here, troops at Frinton prepare to repel the invader. This film shows a strong defence line, but it was a bluff. Most of Britain's military hardware lay abandoned on the beaches of Dunkirk. Evacuees had been sent to East Anglian coastal towns, but with the threat of invasion, everyone except essential workers are advised to leave. This film shows Southend. Within a month, 170,000 people, nearly half the town's population, had gone. Children were once again dispatched to unknown destinations in the countryside. Herbert Smerdon shot this film of his children leaving Clacton. His wife wrote,
"They went in good heart. The last thing photographed was little Peter's face at the carriage window with his thumbs up."
After visiting Peter at a farm near Droitwich, Mrs. Smerdon wrote,
"He was quite happy with a little girl to play with. A pleasant family.
Returning to Clacton, she found a ghost town.
Shops closed down and shutters up at all the windows of both shops and houses. It looked a dreary sight. Hundreds of families left the town. Furniture vans appeared and disappeared, again down to the London road in a long, long trail.
The beach at Clacton, like other coastal towns, was reinforced with scaffolding, barbed wire, tank traps, mines and gun emplacements, all waiting for the imminent invasion.
Since the war began, the government have received countless inquiries.
On the 14th of May, 1940, Anthony Eden, Secretary of State for War, broadcast an appeal for men aged between 17 and 65 to join a new force to defend the country against the Nazi threat. To begin with, they had no uniform, just an armband bearing the initials LDV, the local defence volunteers. King George VI inspecting the LDV at Frinton. The LDV, or Home Guard as it became known, was formed to protect installations, relay messages, and look out for enemy parachutists. Home Guard units improvised. One weapon was a Molotov cocktail, a glass bottle filled with petrol and then set alight. It was believed to be effective against tanks. At first, the Home Guard were overzealous, and some were even arrested by the police for threatening civilians. They often clashed with the public, especially when Home Guard units demanded to see the papers of people they had known since childhood. Some Home Guard units were trained for sabotage. If the Germans invaded, their job would be to live off the land and work behind enemy lines. This secret army, 202 Battalion, had supply dumps scattered across East Anglia. The Home Guard was a way for unfit and older men to help with the war effort. In Essex, its ranks swelled to 40,000. Here, the 7th Battalion of the Norfolk Home Guard, based in King's Lynn, train in bombed-out buildings in the town. A Home Guard platoon marching through a Bedfordshire village. It is unlikely that they would have done more than delay a German advance, as no amount of enthusiasm would stop a tank. In 1941, this civilian force was brought under army regulations, but by then the threat of invasion had receded. As the Battle of Britain began in earnest, civil defence exercises were stepped up. East Anglia is largely rural and therefore received fewer air attacks than other areas. But the bigger towns, like Ipswich, Norwich and Colchester, had important factories which became targets. At Orford, near Ipswich, a mobile hospital unit practices an emergency drill. a field hospital is formed to treat the victims of an air attack. Casualties are rushed to an emergency medical station set up in the grounds of a country house. For now, they are still practicing, but these drills were to prove invaluable. As food shortages became more acute, rationing became more stringent. To obtain the basic ration, a shopper had to register with a shopkeeper, who was allocated goods according to the number of customers supplied. By 1941, sugar, butter, bacon, cheese and meat were all rationed. The aim was to avoid panic buying, or the rich being better fed than the poor. For many, the greatest hardship came from the rationing of tea. From July 1941, as U-boats took their toll on food imports, Britons were allowed just 2 ounces of tea per week.
You'll be going to get your new ration book soon. Before you go, see that the address on your identity card and your ration book are the same. If they're not, take them to your local food office.
Having made her purchases, this customer in Peterborough hands her food book to the grocer, who ticks off the appropriate number of coupons used week by week. In 1942, the weekly ration for a family of 4 was 2 pounds of sugar, half a pound each, half a pound of tea, or 2 ounces each, half a pound each of butter and lard, a pound of margarine, 4 ounces each, 12 ounces of cheese, or 3 ounces each, a box of dried eggs, and a pound of bacon, or 4 ounces each. Bread was never rationed, although its quality deteriorated.
If you keep your bread in a tin or bin, make sure that the bread can breathe. If the tin itself has no air holes, then tilt the lid slightly. This way it will keep fresh longer.
Several people tried to work their way round the rations, and a black market thrived. This was especially true of petrol. This is Hitchin in Hertfordshire. Non-essential motoring was banned, but it was not uncommon to see private cars on the roads.
The battle for fuel is on. You have seen your battle orders in the press. Have you cut them out? Have you worked out your fuel target? This is a battle on the home front from which no one can stand aside.
This is the BBC Home Service. The Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries has appointed a War Agricultural Executive Committee for each county in England and Wales. Their immediate task is to see that additional land is brought under the plough with all speed.
In 1940, the Minister of Agriculture appealed for 2 million extra acres to go under the plough. War agricultural committees set targets county by county, and by the spring of 1940, Norfolk, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire all exceed their quotas, despite the severe winter. German U-boats were sinking British merchant ships, and farmers were under immense pressure to grow as much food as possible. Country women hoeing on a North Norfolk farm in the spring of 1940. Although farm work was a reserved occupation, thousands of farm workers volunteered for the services and left the land. Women, therefore, had to make up the numbers, especially the Land Army girls. The work was tough, but the Land Army met it with determination. By 1943, there were 80,000 land girls working on the farms. A working week of 50 hours was compulsory, and the land girls earned just 1 week's paid holiday a year. 7 o'clock reveille at a farm holiday camp. In return for helping with the harvest, children received bed, board, and a small wage. Young women who belong to weekend clubs give up their free time to work on the farms. Cycling out on Saturday afternoon, they would return home exhausted on Sunday evenings. It was not uncommon to see off-duty soldiers offering to lend a hand on the land. Despite the need to grow more food, thousands of acres of land were commandeered by the army for training. In July 1942, 3,000 acres of wheat-growing land in East Anglia was taken over by the military. Farmers were compensated, but were still under pressure to grow more. In the countryside near Thetford, Norfolk, whole villages were evacuated for a new battle training area, which remains in use to this day. Large tracts of land were also lost to airfield construction. 100,000 acres in Norfolk alone was commandeered for airfields. Vast quantities of material and large numbers of men and women poured into the region in the largest civil engineering project Britain had seen.
Here's a typical airfield in construction. It's miles from anywhere, on a piece of ground that had to be cleared and leveled before the concrete runways could be laid down. The airfield is half finished. The main runways are already in place, but it'll be some time yet before the job is complete. In the meantime, it's a desert of mud and water. Actually, there are about 1,000 men working on the site, but in such a vast area, you don't see many of them at once. Here are some of the men going to dinner. There's a camp here made of nissen huts, and the canteen serves hundreds of meals every day.
By May 1942, there were 56,000 construction workers in the region, mainly from Scotland, Wales and Neutral Ireland. Accommodated in special camps, they are taken by lorry to the sites.
For all of them, it's a proud moment while the airfield is still being built to watch the first bomber taking off.
Many children grew up during the war barely seeing their fathers. Most mothers were out all day at work, leaving children free to make their own amusements. This film shows a brief snatch of normal family life. These soldiers are home on leave, at the back of a row of terraced houses in Norwich. By the spring of 1942, Norwich had suffered 27 air raids, killing 81 people. The Luftwaffe began to target historic cities listed in the Baedeker tourist guide. On March 28, 1942, bombers pounded Norwich. In the communication centres, telephone operators tried to stay calm and coordinate the civil defence volunteers as buildings were destroyed around them. Waterworks Road, the morning after the first raid. Ernest Croxon, a policeman, saw his house collapse after a direct hit by a bomb. After making sure his wife and daughter were safe in their Anderson shelter, he returned to duty. This film, shot by an American serviceman 2 years after the Blitz on Norwich, shows the devastation around St. Benedict Street. The first raid lasted 65 minutes. Over 50 tons of high explosives were dropped, killing 162 people and injuring 600. A second raid killed 69 and injured 89. Most of the bombs fell on residential areas. Rows of terraced houses were reduced to rubble. 1,200 people were made homeless. The dead were buried in the cemetery in Earlham Avenue, many in a mass grave, with full civic and religious ceremony. A second mass grave was dug, but mercifully never used. After the horror of the Blitz, Norwich suffered 15 more air raids, the last being on the 6th of November 1943. But daily life went on, although much of the city lay in ruins. Business as usual at Halland White Shoe Factory, Norwich. Despite the privations and anxieties of war, people work longer hours than ever before.
Music while you work of good day to you this morning on Rhythmic Records.
Going to the cinema was one way to escape the drudgery of long working hours and wartime life. There was no ice cream or sweets, and people took their thermos flasks to keep warm while seeing the latest dramas.
Phil Baker, Eugene Pallette, Edward Everett Horton, Charlotte Greenwood, Tony DeMarco, James Ellison, Sheila Ryan.
Journey to a star would not be very far as long as I'm alone with you.
The tip-off on its hilarity, romance, music, rhythm, splendor, and all-around entertainment is its title, The Girls He Left Behind. All of it filmed in red, hot, and blue Technicolor.
The cinema was also a powerful way of getting across government propaganda.
It is bombs that will wreck the power behind the Axis war machine. But the hand that releases them is only one out of the many that contributed to the job. Manning the planes were the air crews who risked their lives to reach the target and deliver the goods. And there were the ground crews who bombed up the planes. Yes, and many others who took a hand in this raid. Listen to what some of them have to say.
We didn't half give him a tasting last night.
Here, we dropped some real big uns.
And we must have done some awful damage.
Yes, we're sending Hitler's output up all right. Right up.
What I maintain is, if we keep hammering as we did last night, we can't help but smash them.
Bombs on Germany. In spirit, every one of us was on that raid. Whether we flew the planes or serviced them, whether we built the planes or were privileged to pay for them, we're going to keep up the attack with bigger bombers, better bombs, and faster fighters. Until everywhere the earth and sky are made safe again, let's save and lend to get our wings for victory and send the Axis bombs, bombs, and yet more bombs.
Everyone knows there's an awful shortage of jam jars these days. So quite a lot of jam has to be put into cans, like this. Just the same, and you needn't bother to empty it out of the can. Just keep it in the larder, like this.
In the summer of 1942, a nationwide campaign was launched to collect salvage for recycling. The Women's Voluntary Service distributed sacks, and people collected bottles, rags, kitchen waste, cardboard, metal and even bones to be made into glue. The salvage was traded in and the money went into the war effort. As well as recycling, the government encouraged people to conserve fuel and use fewer resources.
A nice brimming tub, sang old Humberstone. My loofah, my sponge, and my pumice stone. A tubful, you rotter. You'll get in hot water. And he did, as you see from his tombstone.
Wakey, wakey, boys!
I say, what a smasher!
Yes, but they're balmy. Sensible people will help the milkmen and themselves by washing the bottles and putting them out every day.
So you see, we're not really balmy, are we, boys?
Oh.
The government held several drives to raise money for weapons. This is War Weapons Week in Bedfordshire, 1941. Led by the Home Guard, civil defence units put on a fundraising parade. These events encouraged people to save in the belief that their money would be used to buy weapons for the war effort. In fact, the real effort was to combat inflation by taking money out of circulation. Most of it ended up in financial institutions, earning them interest. A similar parade of sea cadets was held in Warship Week, Hitchin, 1942. This was also an official savings campaign aimed at making money for the Navy. The highlight of the week was a review with dancing girls and a cardboard warship. The week raised a total of £280,000. A wartime wedding. This couple, leaving a Norwich church, are fortunate in having a stylish marriage. Getting hold of material for dresses was difficult, and most brides either used second-hand material or parachute silk if it was available. As large numbers of men and women were moved around the country, the number of weddings, divorces and pregnancies reached record levels. Britain was suffering chronic shortages, but community spirit remained important. People gelled together because there was a sense of common cause and purpose. This is a community sports day at Aspley Guys in Bedfordshire. Although rationing was strict, most Britons were healthier than at any other time in their history. Rations meant everybody had a more or less equal share of food, and a number of wartime children grew up fit and strong. For once, the filmmaker himself was caught on film. August 1942. The first units of the American 8th Air Force arrived in East Anglia, but the local press were forbidden to announce their presence, even though they could be seen walking the streets. One resident of East Anglia said, "First impressions were positive, and we were inclined to be patronising. They were cheerful, chatty, not over-disciplined. But the GI's relaxed, informal manner soon makes them popular, not least with girls. Off-duty tourists, snapping picturesque pubs for the folks back home. Major towns like Norwich, with their pubs, clubs and dance halls, became the haunt of young Americans in search of relaxation. One observer from Alconbury wrote that the Americans were raring to go into action, and when one talked to them, one sensed that they did not understand it would be a dangerous activity. They soon did. Flying daylight missions over Europe, the Americans suffered appalling losses. The odds against their completing a tour of duty was slim in the first year of operations. Troops departing from Newmarket Station. General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, arrives for a tour of inspection of Eastern Command. He will oversee the biggest invasion force in history. Prior to D-Day, Amphibious and special vehicles, like this flail tank, used for clearing barbed wire and mines, were tested on East Coast beaches and on the Norfolk Broads. Amphibious vehicles and landing craft are seen here on the River Orwell. In addition to the real invasion force, a phantom army was assembled on the East Coast to induce the Germans into believing that a second invasion would be launched from East Anglia. So successful was the deception that the Germans held back large numbers of troops in northeastern France long after D-Day. A day at the races. Crowds make their way to the 1944 St. Leger at Newmarket. Almost all the classic races were held at Newmarket during the war, attracting enormous crowds. And with so many British and American airfields nearby, together with thousands of troops, servicemen made up the majority of spectators. March, Cambridgeshire, in the spring of 1944. From their training grounds in Norfolk, tanks from the British 9th Armoured Division are on their way to the south coast for embarkation. After 4 years, the Allies are about to return to mainland Europe. Tanks of the 30th Armoured Brigade assembling at Newmarket. By 1944, East Anglia was packed with troops. This included 7 armoured and infantry divisions and supporting brigades. Convoys of Allied troops and vehicles, such as these at Thetford, Norfolk, were a common sight.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is a special bulletin read by John Snag. D-Day has come. Early this morning, the Allies began the assault on the northwestern face of Hitler's European fortress. The first official news came just after 9:30.
King's Lynn, 1944. With the liberation of France and the end of the war in sight, people began to feel more relaxed. The ban on signposts was revoked, and the blackout on homes, street lamps and car lights was eased. In September, double summertime, introduced in 1941, was revoked. Mines and rusting barbed wire at Yarmouth. After 4 years of living in fear of German hit-and-run raids, life on the East Coast began to return to normal, although beaches remained out of bounds. Thousands of mines had to... In November, the Home Guard stood down, an occasion marked with parades, bands and speeches. By 1944, there were hundreds of thousands of men serving in the Home Guard, with 32,000 officers and men in Norfolk alone.
1.5 pounds of sugar, 8 penny worth of meat, 4d fresh meat, 4d corn meat, half a pound of sweets for children and the over 70s. Yes, these are the extra Christmas rations. How to get them? All the details are in Food Facts in your paper this week.
Christmas, 1944. Children from an orphanage run to trucks to take them to a party held by the American 3rd Division Strategic Air Depot at Watton, Norfolk. The Americans were very popular with local children. They lavished them with sweets and attention. "We like them very much," recalls one GI. Kids would often come and pay us visits, and we always gave them treats. We always felt sorry for them. Used to wartime shortages, the children were overwhelmed by the abundance of food offered to them. In addition to roast turkey and all the trimmings, there was the inevitable candy and a visit from Father Christmas. Christmas Eve, the Americans mounted the biggest air raid in history. The Nazis had launched a surprise attack, and the Allies were in retreat. The bombing run was a success. German supplies were cut off, and the advance was halted. Great Dunmow, Essex. From February 1945, East Anglian airfields prepared for Operation Varsity, the airborne assault on the east bank of the Rhine. On 24th of March, troops and equipment were loaded into the gliders. In all, 3,000 transport planes and gliders carrying 21,000 troops took part in the operation. The Allies were cutting deep into Germany.
Here is a news flash. The German radio... I repeat that. The German radio has just announced...
Home movies show how one family at Cringleford, Norwich, celebrated the news. May 1945. As the end of the war in Europe approached, the news was confusing. While the Germans surrendered to the Russians on the 2nd, it was not until the 7th that they surrendered to the Western Allies. Officially, the war finally ended on May the 8th, VE Day.
Yesterday morning, the representative of the German High Command signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land.
VE Day, Aspley Guys, Bedfordshire, celebrated on May 9th. The delay was caused by confusion over when the war would officially end, and the time taken to organise festivities. Tea parties were set up on trestle tables in the village square. A bonfire with an effigy of Hitler was prepared to illuminate the evening celebrations. Everybody joined in a spontaneous national party. Despite rationing, which would remain in force for another 9 years, tables groaned under the weight of sandwiches, jellies, buns and cakes, giving children a treat many were to remember for the rest of their lives. Sunday, 13th of May. Official church services and parades like this one at Luton are held throughout the region. But the war was not yet over. While the fighting in Europe was finished, the war against Japan is a bitter struggle. The Allies are winning, but many people in East Anglia have relatives serving in the conflict. Here, the Royal Norfolks in India and Burma send greetings to relatives in Norwich.
Hiya, Norwich. Hiya, sis. I hope you're all well. You can see for yourself that I'm okay, you lucky people. Tell little Jody to keep a pecker up, and by gosh, can I do the pint of bullets now? Well, there's one thing, whatever I say to you now, you can't answer me back, can you? Well, cheerio, keep small, I'll be seeing you.
Greetings, Norwich, from your boys of the well-known Royal Norfolk Regiment in Burma. And the first to speak today is Captain Horner.
I'm sure the last thing you expected was to see me on a film. I'm very fit and well, as are we all, and we're all going to keep that way. As you probably know, the regiment has been honored with the privilege of marching through the city with full honors, and we're all very proud of that. We've really got the Japs on the run this time, and we're going to keep on at them until we've run them right out of Burma. Well, cheerio. Remember that we've not forgotten Singapore, and first at Kohima, and now in Burma, we are having our revenge. So cheerio, and I'll be seeing you soon. Now here's Sid Page.
Hello, Laura and everybody. As you can see, I'm looking fit and well, and I hope you all keep well. And I hope to be seeing you soon. Well, I ain't got much more to say now, but take care of yourselves, and God bless you all. I've been on Ted Newsted now.
This is London. The Prime Minister, the Right Honourable C.R. Attlee.
Japan has today surrendered. The last of our enemies is laid low.
August 15th, 1945. Aspley Guys once again puts out the flags. There were more services. The ringing of church bells, parades and street parties. At last, the men from the Far East would be coming home. The most catastrophic war in human history was over. For 6 years, people in East Anglia lived under the cloud of war. They suffered hunger, cold, and shortages of every commodity. For the first time since Napoleon, the region braced itself for an invader who never came. Ordinary people lived through the horrors of bombing raids and the uncertainties of everyday life. They also came face to face with people from other nations and walks of life. It was a time of new opportunities, an event that brought people together and broke others apart. East Anglia, like the rest of the country, would never be the same again.